you're about to meet is possibly Louisiana's most prominent conservative pundit. He's the publisher of thehayride.com. He's a regular columnist at the American Spectator, and he's the author of 5 books, including the Revivalist Manifesto, which is due out May 1st. And I'll let him tell you a little bit more about where you can get a copy of that. He is, Bombardier Books is the publisher, so that's important to note. He's an LSU graduate. He lives and works in Baton Rouge, and I'd love to have you welcome Scott McKay.
See if I can get the stopwatch feature on my phone.
We got Drew.
Drew out there says she'll be happy.
You guys will tell me.
He gives us a minute.
I'm here to tell you about a book, and I'm not just here to tell you about a book, because what we'll do is we'll do questions after I'm done. But last fall, I got approached by a publisher on a couple of columns that I wrote at the American Spectator, talking about where we are as a Republican Party and as a conservative movement. Can y'all hear me in the back? Okay, good. And specifically, a couple of these things, I talked about something that I decided to call revivalism, which is really just conservatism on offense. One of the things that I think a lot of us have been pretty frustrated about is the idea that if you go back through history, you'll notice that conservatives fight against things, and then like 10 years later, they're fighting to preserve them against worse things that the left is trying to do. You know, and some of these fights, and you know, going back years, kind of seem quaint compared to the challenges that we have now. And part of this problem is that we've adopted sort of a defensive ideology that was okay when the opposite side of the political debate largely wanted the same things that we do. They just wanted to go about them differently. But what we see now is we're up against people who don't want the same things that we do, who don't have the same values that we do. And so the formulation of conservatism may not quite be as appropriate as it formerly was. So that's sort of the genesis of how the idea of the book came about. But as I got started researching the book, I've got like a whole structure of it that I sort of want to put in front of you for your perusal and hopefully interest that you might want to buy this thing when it comes out. So everybody that I talk to, and I'm sure most of you in this room, has this sort of, especially today with what happened with what's happening in Ukraine and what may very well be happening in Taiwan, is there's this sense that America, as we've known it, is in decline, or that America's done, or that, you know, all hell's about to break loose. And, you know, for a while I kind of flirted with that idea because, you know, I was as torn up about the stolen election as a lot of you guys were. And I actually had written a bunch of things like, you know, stolen election breaks the republic, and we're now in a post-republic period in American history. But the more I saw of this regime that's running the country now, and the fact that they're really not very good at what they do, it's changed my thinking. And then I read a book that was recommended to me called Shattered Consensus by a historian named James Pearson, who's actually a really brilliant guy. And I ended up having the opportunity to talk to Pearson a bunch of times as I was writing this current book. And this guy's formulation is that American history has had 3 distinct periods in which a political consensus was formed. And, you know, I mean, you guys are familiar with the concept of the Overton window. Like, there's certain things that you can do in politics and policy that kind of fall within what everybody thinks is acceptable, and then everything else just doesn't go anywhere. Well, that Overton window gets set at the beginning of these political eras, and everybody's got to sort of pour policy into it. So, for example, Jefferson wins the 1800 presidential election, and the Federalist Party goes away, more or less. And the Democrats win the next 6 presidential elections. They don't lose until 1824. Then you had, the Civil War breaks out, and the next, 20 years are the Republican Party, which then sets the Overton window. Then Herbert Hoover makes every mistake possible when he turns a recession into the Depression, and you have FDR, and the Republicans don't win an election again until 1952. By then, the New Deal is set in place, and we have the current political era, which is defined by the welfare state, the regulatory state, and the military-industrial complex, and now the media-medical complex that we didn't even think was a thing until COVID came. But this era, just like all of the previous eras, is beginning to die out. And one of the reasons that you think America is in decline and that we're over and all the rest of it is that the consensus that formed our country's politics, is fraying, right? The current consensus we have was formed with, William F. Buckley conservatives and Daniel Patrick Moynihan liberals, of which those don't really exist that much in our politics anymore. I mean, if you remember, Buckley's magazine, National Review, came out with an entire issue devoted to the concept that Donald Trump was not acceptable as the Republican nominee. And everybody well, not everybody, but most of the people who wrote Never Trump in that issue have repudiated what they said, because 80-something% of the Republican Party is fully behind Trump. And not just Trump, but what he represents, which is a change in how the Republican Party works. On the left, the sort of Mary Landrieu, John Breaux, liberal Democrats, really what's left of that is Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, and you see how much fun they're having, because the hard left has taken over. So what's coming, and I'm gonna wrap this up, and then we're gonna get to the questions in just a second. But what's coming is one of those two forces, the sort of Tea Party, MAGA, I'm going to call us revivalist conservatives that are willing to step away from that sort of Bush Republican GOP establishment type mentality on one side, and then sort of the hard left, Antifa, Bernie Sanders people, which are the active ingredient on the Democrat side. One of the two is going to form the next consensus in American politics. I think it's going to be us, because I think the public is getting a taste of what the hard left has to offer, and if I can use the vernacular, it sucks, right? Everybody understands this. And it's like we're only a year in, and it's already bad enough that people are furious. So we're going to have a great opportunity as a movement if we're willing to embrace doing things that actually roll America back to when things worked better, or even maybe move forward to some things that would work better given technology and the way society is than the way we've been doing them for the last 80, 90 years. I'm talking about the welfare state, the regulatory state, things like that. We're going to have an opportunity to make changes if we're worthy of the power the public is willing to give us, which I think is pretty obvious every time you look at one of these congressional generic ballot polls and all Biden's approval rate. The public's going to put the Republicans back in charge. But what's that going to mean? So the Revivalist Manifesto is sort of a playbook for how some of this can be done. And the publisher wants me to write a whole bunch of these books talking about, a legislative agenda, a cultural agenda, and all these different kinds of things. So that's what the book's going to be about. It's going to be out May 1st. It'll be everywhere. It'll be in bookstores. It's going to be on Amazon and all the rest of it. So that's the book. And now that I've done that, I think I want to go to questions, because I know you guys have some. You've already hit me with them when I went to the before. So let's give those an airing. And Lynn, did you want to start? Or?
No,
Okay.
I would like them to ask
Okay.
you whatever they wish, you don't mind.
All right, Debbie, you got one?
Yep,
Okay.
got one. So, we all read this Democratic pollster Fosho's comment in the business report that said Bill Cassidy will be the most likely candidate to win the next governor's race in Louisiana. What do you think about his comments?
Well, okay, so you got to remember who Ron Fauché is. He's got a polling and political consulting firm in D.C. called Claris Research, which is a Democrat firm.
Right.
Ron Fauché is a Democrat, has been a Democrat for, forever. Ran for mayor of New Orleans in like 79 or 80, I think, and lost to Dutch Morial. And he is sort of the Walt Leger, John Bell Edwards, John Breaux kind of, people call them bourbon Democrats, right? Which is sort of an outdated term because they don't really exist anymore. But the fact that there's two things that are obvious here, which is when Ron Fauché is talking about Bill Cassidy, first of all, somebody has paid him to do it.
Yep.
Okay, because that's how these guys roll. And whatever polling he's got to support what he says is somebody probably from Cassidy's team paid him to do it. I mean, this is how the game works. That's number one. But the second thing is, and this kind of ties into the Senate race that's going on this fall, which is the bourbon Democrats, which is, let's just go, it's the white Democrats in the state, are 36% of registered Democrats in Louisiana at this point. 60% of registered Democrats in Louisiana are black. So there's this interesting sort of back and forth within the Democrat Party in Louisiana, which is the bourbon Democrats tell the black community, hey, you got to let us run at the top of the ticket because we can win and you can't, right? And what that means is they then come to them after the fact if they do win and they say, okay, you can have crumbs from the table because we're in control, which is basically where we are now, and which is why you keep hearing all of these comments from members of the Legislative Black Caucus complaining about John Bell Edwards, that he didn't, he wanted to grow government, so what did they do? They raised sales taxes, which the black community has always thought was a regressive tax that they pay for more than anybody else. They wanted to raise income taxes, but of course that wasn't possible in the state. So things like that. And then of course, we don't need to get into the whole Ronald Reagan thing, which really shows the difference between what the black community gets by putting a white Democrat in charge, as opposed to the Republicans, which from their standpoint, as much as they hate us, or a lot of them do, there's no difference at this point when you start talking about Ronald Reagan. So, Richard Carbo, who is John Bell Edwards' little political campaign guru guy, now works for a Washington, D.C. political campaign firm that's basically an eat what you kill shop. In other words, go find a candidate, represent them, raise money, and then we get our cut, right? So Carbo went around and he basically talked to every white Democrat politician in the state that he could find, trying to get one of them to run for Kennedy so that he could make money this year. After about a dozen of them, and there were no takers, he found an airline pilot from Bunkie who lives here and has a neck about this long and is one of the worst public speakers I've ever seen. That's this guy, Luke Nixon. We call him the alpaca at the neighborhood. But the thing of it is that nothing against airline pilots, but that is the worst job you can possibly have and then launch a political career. You are in airport hotels out of state every night, right? Two nights a week you're home and interacting with your community. Otherwise you are flying the friendly skies. You're going to take this guy and run him statewide when he's never run for anything else. It's absurd. It's ludicrous. And so for 4 months they're trying to run this guy, and he raises a grand total of $190,000, right? So Gary Chambers, who everybody here knows, gets really irritated at the fact that Richard Carbo never talked to a single black politician about running for the Senate on the Democrat side. And ultimately decided, you know, I raised $400,000 when I ran for Congress last year. And I got hooked up with Stacey Abrams when I endorsed Karen Carter Peterson. So I know how this whole game works now, and I'm gonna run for the Senate. So Gary did. And he cut a commercial where he's smoking a blunt, talking about how marijuana being illegal is a racist thing, it hurts the black community, blah, 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 blah. And then he cuts another one where he's burning the Confederate flag. And he goes to California and he raises a whole bunch of money from the weed dealers and growers in California. And he goes to New York and he has a big $2,900 a plate fundraiser in Harlem. And before you know it, Gary Chambers has raised $550,000 in a month compared to Luke Mixon's $190,000 in 4 months. Who do you think is going to do better against John Kennedy in that Senate race, Chambers or Mixon? The answer is Chambers is going to do 3-1 what Mixon does. And this changes Louisiana politics perhaps forever because the Bourbon Democrats have nothing. They can't find candidates. They can't find anybody who can get votes anymore. So now it's, okay, if we can't run a Democrat, what are we going to do? And if you'll remember, 7 years ago, before John Bel Edwards' campaign took off at all, there was a lot of talk. I mean, there was even columns like in the Times-Picayune in New Orleans about how Democrats needed to get behind Jay Darden because he was reasonable and moderate and would give them a seat at the table if they helped make him governor instead of David Vitter. So, I'm not saying this is what happened, I'm just saying that you might consider that when Ron Fauché, who is a representative of the Bourbon Democrats, begins talking up Bill Cassidy, who is the never-Trump Republican senator, and who is now trying to drum up support to run for governor next year, that maybe that has a connection to the state of white Democrat politics in Louisiana. Now, I don't think that if they do this, it will work for them because I guarantee you there will be a black Democrat in the race. And just to show where the Bourbon Democrats in Louisiana are, I mean, Joe Biden's a pretty good stand-in for those guys. There is another polling firm out there called Civicuse, and they have like this big giant, 150,000 people that they do online polling every week. And you sign up to be in the polling universe and then they send you polling. Every week they're doing a Joe Biden approval poll. And he's at 34% nationally. Next week it's going to be 24% after the Ukraine thing. But anyway, he's at 34% nationally. He's at 28% in Louisiana. Among white voters in Louisiana, Joe Biden is at 12% approval. That's Luke Mixon's base vote, and that's like a white Democrat's base vote in a statewide race in Louisiana. 12% of the white vote is like 7% of the electorate. So if Mixon does better than 7%, I'd be surprised, especially since he's going to run out of money by election day. But that's where they are. So Bill Cassidy might be your stand-in Democrat candidate if he does run. And you can factor that into your analysis of who you're going to vote for.
That's scary.
Yeah, that's a longer answer than I know you were asking for.
Yes, very good answer. I know you touched on the Ronald Green thing just a moment ago, but what we would all like, I think I can speak for the group, we would love for our governor to resign, whether it be over that or over one of his other many sins he has committed.
Sure.
What is your prediction on what's going to transpire with this Ronald Green thing as far as our governor?
Well, he's already laid down a marker that he's not resigning.
Yeah,
Now,
it's too good to be true.
Now, and I don't want to trash Clay Scheck-Snyder too much, but what I notice is that when Clay Scheck-Snyder actually gets mad enough to do something in the legislature, it's not because there's some ideological affront that he's got to do something about, or that he gets all torqued up about policy or any of that. If you really want to get Clay's goat and make him do something, you need to do something that makes Clay mad personally. And when John Bel Edwards lied to Clay Schechtschneider and told him, no, that guy died of a car wreck, okay? That actually did make Schechtschneider mad. And he went and, got this committee going with these 8 state legislators who are now going to look into the Ronald Reagan case. And the thing is there's not a whole lot that we don't know about that case, right? I mean, we know that this guy was not a career criminal. We know that he was beaten to death on a roadside by the state police. You can watch the body cam footage, and it's, in other words, this is the case that Black Lives Matter has been looking for all along, and it was covered up because Edwards was running for re-election, and he needed every black vote he could get, and he really didn't want the black community to be saying, why would we come out and vote for you when you will let something like this happen? So it had to be covered up until the election. And all of that, I think, is going to come out in this committee's report. It has to. So the real question is not whether he resigns. The question is whether he gets impeached.
Well, I was going to say, what's the punishment that
Well,
can
and
be enforced?
the way impeachment works in Louisiana is the same as it works at the federal level. You need 53 votes in the House to impeach. You need 26 votes in the Senate to convict. And I would think that it is possible, particularly if there are sort of revelations of things we all already know that come out as a result of this committee's investigation, I think you could get the 53 votes. I don't know that you could get the 26 votes. But that kind of depends on whether the Black Caucus looks at this thing and realizes, this is going to make us look really bad if the Republicans are going to impeach this guy for something that we're going to stand behind him on. And I wrote a little while ago that, you go back to Malcolm X, where he used to call the black community a political chump because they would allow the Democrats to get away with doing these kinds of things. And that pretty much is still in store with the Ronald Reagan case. So I don't know. I mean, if Schechtschneider and the people in the legislature are willing to continue pushing this, it creates a situation that is untenable for the Black Caucus. And I'd like to see him do that because, frankly, I'm tired of hearing all this Black Lives Matter stuff when the case I actually agree with him on, and I think all of us would agree with him on, they cover up. And so this is a ruse. This is nothing but politics, okay? And it's time for the truth to come out on things like this. Maybe then we can get back to the point where we're all pulling for the same thing and we're arguing about how to get there instead of where we've been over the last 10 years, 15 years, right? As we're all thinking the country's in decline. So, to me, this is sort of a revivalist thing. No, I want the cards on the table. I don't want to play defense and say, oh, we got to keep this safe and I don't want to make anybody mad. It's time to make people mad. Yeah. We're mad. Why are we mad? One more question, or how are we doing? Yes, Susie.
Yeah. What do you predict will happen with the redistricting? Can't find these 8 legislators, legislators. What do you think is going to happen with that?
Okay, the question is redistricting and how's it going to go. I am deferring to Jeff Sadow, who writes at the Hayride and is sort of our resident policy wonk guy. And Jeff has written pretty extensively about redistricting, and his basic take is they have the votes for all of these maps that if all of the votes hold up, they could override every veto that John Bell does, if they have the votes. We saw in the veto session last summer that some of those votes peel off. Jeff thinks the only veto that John Bell will come with is with the congressional map, because that's the demand that's been made. There are enough votes to overturn a veto for that. I'm pretty sure they will. I don't know if he'll veto anything else, state Supreme Court, some of the legislative things. He might, just to sort of keep himself relevant. But, like, for example, the House district map was specifically designed to get as many votes as possible, because if you don't support that map, then you don't know what the next map's going to look like where your district is concerned, right? So My guess is the final outcome, whether it goes to court and you get all these different things, the final outcome will probably look a lot like it looks right now. The question is, how long it takes to get there. And I was really kind of concerned that we were going to end up having a map with a whole bunch of swing districts that would favor rhino candidates, being as though we have a jungle primary. Because there's this dynamic that has always been, particularly for conservatives, really bad in Louisiana, which is you have a majority Republican district, and you have pretty much all Republicans that run in it, and you have a conservative that makes the runoff, and then you have somebody who was a Democrat 5 minutes ago, and they run, and then you've got a Republican majority, but in the runoff, the Democrats are the swing vote, right? So the rhino always wins. And if you do a swing district, then that's really going to happen. But as I understand it, the way these districts are drawn up, if you're conservative, you should be pretty happy. So, we'll see next year what happens. Yes, sir, you were in the back.
They had a court case recently in Arkansas with redistricting.
Alabama.
No,
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, there's two now.
Alabama was both kind of went in the same direction.
Right.
What do you think the implications of that are for Louisiana?
Well, actually, the law on this stuff is fairly clear, as I understand it, which is that you cannot use race as the primary characteristic to govern redistricting. In other words, you can't do like Cleo Fields' old congressional district that was kind of like, looked like something Zorro would draw with his sword. You can't do that anymore. You have to kind of maintain communities of interest and so forth. So, the direction this is moving in is you're going to get a Supreme Court case that basically kind of takes that away. And look, it's valid to say, yeah, we have, a third of the state is black, we should have 2 out of the 6 congressional districts be black. That's valid. The problem is the way the state is laid out and its demographics are such that you can make one pretty easily, which is, Cedric Richmond's old district that Troy Carter has. I mean, that one makes sense. To get a second one is, it's literally ridiculous. You're going to have like a highway as the corridor to get you from one piece to another, and it literally would look like a Rorschach test. And screw up a whole bunch of other districts and make total chaos. Now, if the population were distributed differently in the state, then I think there would be no argument for that. But of course, as Republicans, what we want is 5 out of 6 of them being Republican districts, and that's that. So it happens that our position is the practical one, and I don't think that the courts are going to find differently. Especially since once you get to the Fifth Circuit, those are our people, and they're going to look at this in a minute and go away.
It would have any limiting effect on bringing suit because of the decisions already made.
Well, they're going to bring suit. I just don't know that, how far it gets. And look, you get it in front of Brian Jackson or somebody like that, and yeah, they're going to win at the trial court level. Then it's going to go to the Fifth Circuit, and they won't win. So, yes, ma'am.
What is the reason Republicans don't fight harder for closed primaries?
Well, that dynamic. Oh, the question is what's the reason Republicans don't fight harder for closed primaries? And the answer is in that little thing that I just gave you about the dynamics of the jungle primary in a majority Republican district, and you can get sort of these centrist, like used car salesman politicians who, basically can just pander to the Democrats in the runoff against the conservative. There's a lot of people in the legislature that's how they got elected. So, and then there's a certain, particularly among independent voters in the state, that, I get to, this system's built for me. Like, why would I want to change it? And so you have a lot of Republicans who are, see the independent vote as sort of their base. And so they're not going to do anything to favor a closed primary system where they would actually be accountable to the people that are their core voters, right? Like, want things, and we're going to demand things. Like we would like go to these people and say, you're not going to get elected again unless you sign that petition to reopen the state, rather than have these continuing COVID restrictions. Like, you know, they were, oh no, the majority of my district doesn't want that, right? Like, I mean, they don't want to be accountable to the more activist people in their base, because that they think, well, I'm going to end up being on the wrong side of the majority, which is, you know, I mean, I'll put it this way: in other states, okay, like, you know, we look at somebody like Alan Seabaugh here in Louisiana, and we're like, oh man, I wish we could get, you know, 53 Seabaughs, because then we could really get some stuff done. If you want to get elected in Tennessee to the state legislature, you have to be Alan Seabaugh, because that's who wins the Republican primary, right? Like, they're looking for those guys, because, you know, the primary electorate is essentially conservative activists, and they control the candidates. And so in all of these southern states, they have these legislatures that are, you know, we can't even understand what they're doing. Like in Tennessee, they passed the model anti-critical race theory bill, okay? And they passed it with every newspaper in the state going ballistic, with people demonstrating outside the Capitol. They're like, don't care. We know about this issue and we're doing it. Here, I mean, they ran for the hills at the first sign of trouble. And that's the difference between what you get. Now, here's the fun thing about this with the closed primary thing, is that, you know who also really, really wants to close primaries? The black community. They get to totally take over the Democratic Party if there's a closed primary system. I mean, seriously, they no longer have to listen to this, oh, you gotta let us run at the top of the ticket because we can win. They're like, yeah, forget that. Right? Because not only do you get to be the candidate, your consultants get to control the money. So when all the national money comes in from the unions and the George Soros people, like, they get, the way it's currently done now is that Trey Orso and Michael Bachok get to spend all the money, and they're the conduit. Then they go to the black community and say, okay, here's some money to, you know, to Bold and Life and all these organizations to turn the vote out, but then they get their cut. So if I'm the black community, like, no, I want my guys at the top of the ticket, and I want my consultants to be the ones taking it. You know, there are spoils in the electoral system that don't necessarily involve winning, right? So long as you raise the money, somebody gets to make it. So that's party primaries, and the really it's kind of both sides against the middle is how this thing works.
So you really want the conservatives to team up with the black
There are
caucus.
so many things that where the conservatives and the black community can get together and make deals, it would blow your mind.
Yeah.
I mean, really, like, it would blow your mind. And what has always kind of held us back is sort of that bourbon Democrat kind of, oh, we're conservative, centrist. Those are the people that keep things the way they are.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are all kinds of things that we get all torqued up about that the black community would be happy to trade us a vote for something that they want that we don't care about.
Yeah.
And if we could ever get to the point where there was 2 people in the discussion rather than 3, this is how they fixed all these other states. This is how Tennessee has gone completely, I mean, like, it's a paradise compared to where we are. Texas and Florida, I mean, and Texas is different because it's whites, blacks, Hispanics, and everybody's all mixed up in there. But, you know, I mean, really, it's sort of the John Bell Edwards crowd is what has always stood in our way.
Scott, would you take one more question
Yeah.
and then we'll wrap it up?
Yeah, yeah, I know I'm going over.
No, before, no.
All right. Yes, ma'am. Gwen got the last one. Make it good.
I'm gonna make it good. If we take the House and the Senate in the midterms and so forth,
Right.
do you think they have the kahunas to impeach Trump? I mean, excuse me. Oh God! I'm having the vapors.
Why? I mean, they've done it twice
I
already.
know they've done
Might
it
as well do
twice.
it again.
One more time. Impeach Biden
Right.
and Harris.
Well,
I'm talking a twofer.
look, I wouldn't stop there. I'd impeach Millie, I'd impeach
Millie?
Austin, I'd impeach Jake Sullivan. I mean, I would impeach every single member of that administration, one by one. You know, I mean, the obvious answer would be no, but I think it depends. I've been told this about Kevin McCarthy,
Yeah.
which is, and you know, because my whole thing is like I want McCarthy not to be speaker because the next
Same
most
here.
obvious choice is Steve Scalise, who I want for all kinds of reasons, right? But what I was told is, don't sell McCarthy short. He's not good, but what McCarthy is a classic politician. His whole thing is, I'm with you fellas. Like that's McCarthy's thing. So if the bulk of the Republican caucus in the House wants a certain thing, then Kevin McCarthy wants it more than they do. If they decide they don't want it, then Kevin McCarthy will deny ever wanting it in the first place. So, you know, and that's not ideal, but there is use in a guy like that who is really just there to hold the power and is more than willing to do what everybody wants to do. So, will the majority of the caucus want to do impeachments? I mean, to me, I'd go after the cabinet people before I'd even go after Biden. Because you never know when you get somebody at an impeachment hearing and they come testify, they say, well, I'm just doing what Biden told me.
What Joe told me.
Oh, really? Right? So then you can have that kind of dynamic. But, you know, it's a good question. I don't know that it's the primary thing that they want to put on the agenda, but on the other hand, you're going to get gridlock. So you might as well start the investigations and start some of these hearings and, you know, see how bad you can dirty the guy up. I mean, after all, this is the way Pelosi's run Congress for all this time, and I see absolutely no reason why we should be better people than them. Because what has that gotten us? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if we want to go on offense, then it's time to play some of their stuff back at them. Particularly since we're in the right? I mean, this is something to try to fix the country.
Will you tell us about where we can find your book once
Yeah.
it's published?
Okay, it's going to be on Amazon, and it'll probably get a little bit of promotion on Amazon. At least that's what having a publisher is for. It'll also be at all of the bookstores. You know, Barnes and Noble and all the rest of them will have it, so you can buy a physical copy of the book at a brick and mortar retail location.
And May 1st.
May 1st is the publication date, and
How does one read The Hayride?
thehayride.com.
We should all know that, though.
Yeah, you guys all know how to do it. And then the other place where you can find my stuff is the American Spectator, and that's spectator.org.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We are always delighted to have you. You're welcome here anytime.